bunch of pork-barreling clowns, and I find it incredible.
By no means least, Rupert Lowe.
Well, Chairman, thank you very much. I mean, you've been very active today, so I think I've still got a bit left to ask. I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to hear the write-up that you were given by Yvonne and Simon in our briefing, and to hear you all appear to be so well over your brief. I'm tempted to say we should put you in a bag with most of the other public sector departments and shake you up and hope a bit of you rubs off on them, having sat around this table and listened to very different stories of less success than you appear to have achieved. I was interested, you went live in April 25, and have you had any hiccups or issues since then?
Will you start and I'll come in?
Yeah, we've had a few small issues as well, I'd say. We've still met all of our SLAs, so they're 99.99% of the time the system's been up and running. So like any new platform system, there's been some challenges. But like I say, they've been very kind of small in nature, and settlement has continued throughout the majority of that time as well. So actually we've learned a lot from the system going live. Every little event that we do have, we do kind of instant reviews on the back of, and we learn from again. So, but yeah, there has been a few interruptions, should we say, but nothing fundamental, and we've still hit the main primary SLA that we need to.
And the SLA is for a very high degree of availability. Victoria will probably be able to remind me, but something like 99.9.
Yeah.
But we've had a few, there have been some instances. The good thing is we've always been able to learn from those and establish the root cause. I mean, my vantage point on this is that I'm chair of the RTGS CHAPS board, which is oversees the operation of RTGS and CHAPS. I mentioned earlier we bought CHAPS in-house at the end of 2017, just after I started, and at that point I've said the bank likes governance, so we made the governance more senior. So I run a board with I think 5 non-execs on it, all have a background in payments, and so they, the risk committee that has to explain to them when things have gone wrong, they will get an incident report if there's an incident. So I have I'm on the hook day to day from chairing that, and also, it so happens that Andrew, the governor, has a real background in the operations. So even if it's just a minor thing, he'll always want to know about it. I think the other thing I'd say is we've also had to deliver a lot of change over that period. So back to this evergreening, we've had to introduce all these upgrades during that period. Also, we had to deal with a backlog of defects that we decided we could postpone until we'd gone live. They weren't critical. That came out of that testing process that we talked about in the context of TS3 and TS4. So, I mean, you could I'm very pleased to be responsible and to be on the hook for our payment operations, but it does mean that you're only as good as how you've been that day.
The implementation's been pretty successful, other than a few bits and pieces.
Yeah.
So I was interested in the support, because in my experience of writing the kind of software that you need to do this, it's not just implementation, it's support. So I see you've got there's 125 people still on the project. I think you've got 32, Accenture have got 84 looking at this, PA Consulting 5 and contractors 4. So part of it is implementation. Are you confident that you've got the actual structuring of the support right? Yeah. Because in my experience, when you get involved in writing bespoke software, particularly with people like Accenture, if you're not careful, you end up running up a very big downstream bill. So my question is, have you got that covered off as far as the taxpayer is concerned?
I think we have. I mean, it has contributed to why, and this is rightly, you'd expect the NAO to point out that the running costs have gone up, because, I mean, it was a key part of the contract with Accenture that they would pass everything back to us to run. So we are not contracting out. And in fact, I think we're very close to Accenture's last person. Friday was the last involvement of Accenture. So as part of our increased running costs, we've had all the knowledge transfer from them back
to your staff.
to our staff. And that comes back to what I was saying to a comment from Mr. Osborne about we have had to change not just the RTGS target operating model, but the way the bank is staffed. We have to have these technology experts who can come, and they can, when we have one of these little, usually it's silent running, but when we have one of these and they're just dealing with the change, we'll have one of these instances. We'll get to the, what's happened. We'll be able to work out from the code why it happened. We can fix it. And we can also, back to the innovation agenda that we've been talking about with the chair, these are the people who are going to be enhancing the system
If you need to innovate, you've got the skills in-house to do it. Well, that's great. So you're comfortable that you've got that.
And that's
otherwise, in my experience, people do suffer huge downstream.
No, and we were very. I mean, but it's come at a cost in the sense of our target, our running. It's gone up from 21 million to 40 million, and you mentioned that in the report. That's buying us a lot more in-house technological capacity for this very critical.
But it's been a conscious decision, though.
Yeah.
And we embedded people in the Accenture team really early on, and we've grown that capability throughout the time as well. So
that's great. That's great. Yeah. So you say, and I understood you to say you discussed this with the users, because in your document, ultimately you mention charging for it for this system. So ultimately, as you know, the banks used to be accused, and I've often done it myself, accused of getting between the wall and the wallpaper, in that it took a long time to get your money to go from A to B, and very often they were sitting on the money. So have you, if you're going to start charging the users for this, is that the banks or is that the people who are actually making the transfers? Are the banks less able to get between the wall and the wallpaper with your new system than they were before?
Victoria can give you the chapter and verse on who pays the RTGS and CHAPS levy, but it's the same people paying it now as paying it before. We've changed, as the report points out, the fee structure to allow for those who are very significant users relative to those who aren't. Everyone, though, is having to pay for the renewal of the system on a 20-year payback. We decided, we thought that was reasonable given how much of a leap forward this is. We thought it was reasonable to claw that back over 20 years. Obviously, as we increase access to the system, and that goes back to one of the 5 key priorities in the blueprint, we're going to have more and more interesting people who are using and paying. So, we've got our first omnibus account with Finality. We've got more and more non-bank payment system providers. But of course, they will then pass it on to their end customers. So, I'm not sure how it works with your analogy.
Charging is transparent.
Charging is transparent.
Charging, and then everybody knows what they're dealing with, and then people can see what the frictional costs of making a transfer are. Because if we're trying to collectively help British industry or British commerce or British trade generally, we want a system that is transparent, that does actually serve the end user and not just enrich the banking system, who arguably are the parasites on the back of the productive animal.
So the costs to RT, they get spread between the key users. So some of the CHAPS direct participants who we will charge the individual direct participants there. Another chunk is paid for CREST, security settlement system. Mm-hmm. Other chunks are paid for by the retail systems and Visa. So different organisations pay different chunks. For the CHAPS direct participants, they would then pass that cost on to their customers. But as Dave said, one of the things that we've been trying to do around the whole access regime is to bring in new players, and that came first of all with a policy change. So we were the first G7 central bank to enable non-bank payment service providers to have direct access to RTGS, and then as part of the renewal programme we've been increasing the capacity for more players and also looking to streamline the onboarding process. So the idea is that will enable more of the smaller players, the non-bank payment service providers, to come to us direct. So they are taking out one of those middle banks, so to speak, and to get a bit more competition, which should ultimately enhance
that sounds
customers.
Great. So next question. Can you commercialise this yourselves and actually turn it into something you sell to other countries or other people who might use it? And defray the cost of it even more, or is that something you want to keep as proprietary?
Well, yeah, we certainly wouldn't. I mean, back to the kind of original security considerations. We're not. No, there's no way we're going to commercialise directly the core settlement engine. That had to be built under the tightest. No one's got access to that code. What you were hearing about, even up in Accenture in Newcastle. So, however. And banks do. Our central banks are pretty. I take quite a high priority the security of RTGS, but also of access to our balance sheet. What we are doing though is, through the work we were talking about through the FSB cross-border, where we can share lessons of how our technological solution has worked with other countries, some of whom might be going down more of a wholesale digital currency route than we are, or we're all working at different speeds in that sense, and we can share, and then we can improve our accessibility through ours and stuff to break down the barriers that way. So I would argue it was that way rather than. And more generally, we typically don't think of ourselves as commercialising what we provide as a central bank.
You've got Accenture bolted down from an intellectual property point of view.
It's our IP. We own it. Yeah.
You've got that absolutely bolted
down.
They
can go around and say, we've got a track record of delivery. Look what we did for the Bank of England, but we've got them bolted down on IP.
And I've got two other questions really just from my interest. The first one was this in any way driven by the advent of central bank digital currencies? Because I know the governor is quite keen on them, as was certainly Rishi Sunak. I'm less keen on them. But was that any motivation for this development? Because you did say that the old systems actually were clunky but functional.
I mean, what you've got to distinguish between is money and the rails on which money operates. I mean, and I would argue that the bank, including Andrew Bailey, the governor, we want to make sure that we have the best technological solution that ensures the singleness of money. And for me, that comes back to, the money that's either created on our balance sheet, electronic money, or notes. CBDC is one option, retail CBDC as a different type of money, but that's very distinct from the rails that money is operating on, and that's where I would argue everything we've talked about today, how money and assets are settled. But I would describe us as, we're still in the design phase with the Treasury. We've got to make a decision, I think, this year on our retail CBDC. Equally, we are really pushing hard on stablecoin, which is where the US is going. But again, that comes back to making sure that the bank's balance sheet and operations. If a sterling stablecoin came along, as opposed to a digital pound, could we deal with that? Would that meet our standard of singleness of money, along with the commercial bank money or notes? So, and that world has got more complicated even since we introduced the thinking on the digital pound. So I think this is all very much in flux, and we are just trying to make sure that we are providing both the infrastructure and the technological platform that innovation can take place on, and let's see what form that takes. Whereas clearly when you look at the ECB, they're much more going down the retail. They've gone much further on retail CBDC. The digital euro. We're still at the design phase.
And my final question, again, just reading the document and thinking about this, have you any thoughts about how the rapid development of AI is likely to affect what you're doing? Because it strikes me that the software industry is actually very much at risk from AI, which is, whereas it was probably quite inaccurate a year ago, it's still vaguely inaccurate, but probably in a year's time it's going to be very accurate. How do you see that affecting your operations?
Given that Nathan is, our CIO and has got to think about how that, that part of it, how AI might, if you like, how it might impact on the labour inputs, as it were, and how coding is done. Just to reassure you, as part of narrowly and then more generally, on RT, one thing that we get with RT is a much bigger capability to analyse data. Mm-hmm. So we've now got the capacity through the new system to ingest vast quantities of payments data that we can then look for patterns. And you can easily imagine how and other central banks have done this, that an AI application would be looking for an outlier payment that might tell you something, either that there's a problem with the payment. That could be because there was something dodgy about it, or there was something interesting about it economically. So being able to use kind of machine learning techniques analytically is something we need to make more progress on now that we've got. But that is one example of an analytical application. More generally across the bank, as I'm sure you're aware, we've got like every institution, we have to have an AI strategy. We're thinking about how it could impact on everything that we're doing. But do you want to say something about just from your business area?
Yeah. So like Dave said, we've been really focused on the AI strategy, the policy, ethics framework, all that kind of stuff, which is in place. And we've got a lot of experiments that are going on. I think it's fair to say they break down into kind of productivity type areas, or then to Dave's point about use cases that we've got for more analytical purposes. We're already exploring on the actual platform that we've built about how our AI ops can help us, give us insight into incidents and that type of stuff. So I'd say watch this space. It's something we are working on, but then it gives us a big data set to kind of play with, basically. So we've got a lot that we could be doing here. We are exploring quite a lot at the moment already. So, but that's more of an enterprise-wide as well as specifically for RT as well.
But we are thinking about how it could impact on every part of our workforce, whether that's coders, people doing policy analysis, could NPC members in future be replaced by, agents?
Very definitely.
Right.
I think the whole lot of them are a bunch of pork-barreling clowns, and I find it incredible.